My name is Farid Al-Hassan. For over 2 decades, I served as a military general in Yemen. I was 48 years old when my life broke open and turned into something I did not recognize. By that point, I had spent more years in uniform than I had spent out of it. I knew how to command men. I knew how to read intelligence reports. I knew how to plan an operation, go in at night, and come out with results. That was the language of my life. Orders. Results. Duty. I grew up in a household where my father was a military man before me. He did not talk much about feelings. He talked about responsibility and honor and the duty a man owes to his country and to his religion. Those words were in the air of my childhood the way other families have music in the air of theirs. Constant. Familiar. So normal that I stopped noticing them and simply absorbed them until they became my own. By the time I entered service at 25, I already thought like a soldier. Not because I was forced to, because it felt natural. Because that world made sense to me in a way that the civilian world never fully did. There was a clear structure. There were clear rules. You knew who was above you and who was below you and what was expected. I found comfort in that. I found meaning in it. Over the years, I moved up in rank. I led operations that people in leadership praised. I was trusted with more sensitive assignments. And with each promotion, with each success, the version of me that could sit quietly with difficult questions got smaller and smaller. There was simply no room for it. The job required certainty. The job required a man who could make decisions fast and not look back. I was based in Taiz, and the men under my command called me the Iron General. I never asked them to, but I never told them to stop either. Because in a strange way, I believed it. I believed that emotion was weakness and discipline was strength. I believed that a good soldier did not ask whether an order was right. He asked whether it was given. Those were my values. That was the code I lived by for 23 years. And then came the night of January 2026. I need to stop for a moment before I talk about that night. I need you to understand something important. When military intelligence passed information to me about a secret gathering of Christians meeting in an abandoned warehouse on the edges of Taiz, I did not hesitate. Not even for a second. In my mind, these were people meeting in secret, outside of what was allowed. That was all I needed to know. I had led raids before. I had shut down underground gatherings before. I told myself this was the same. I was protecting my country. I was doing what I was trained to do. That is what I told myself. We arrived shortly before midnight. It was cold that January, the way it gets in Taiz at night, the kind of cold that pushes through the walls of an old building and settles in the floor. My men surrounded the warehouse from 3 directions. I could see light through the broken windows. Faint light, like candles maybe, or a small lamp turned low. There were shapes moving inside. People standing together. Sitting. Some of them were holding things. Papers, maybe. I did not know. We gave the order to surrender. What happened next, I have turned over in my mind 10,000 times. There was confusion. Someone panicked. I still do not know who fired first. But once it started, it did not stop quickly. By the time everything was still again, there were 36 people dead inside and around that building. Women. Older people. A few who were young. I walked through the inside of the warehouse after the shooting stopped. I had walked through the aftermath of operations before. I thought I knew what it felt like. I thought I had built something hard enough inside me to carry that feeling and keep moving. I was wrong. Something was different that night. I cannot explain it fully even now. It was not the number of people who had died. It was not the way the warehouse looked. It was something else. Something in the air, maybe. Something I cannot put into words cleanly. A kind of weight that I felt in my chest that was not there before. And then I saw him. Near the front of the warehouse, on the ground, there was a man who was still alive. He had been shot more than once. That was clear. His clothes were dark with blood. His breathing was slow and broken. There was no question that he was dying. I have seen enough dying men to know what that looks like. He did not have long. What stopped me was not his condition. What stopped me was the sound he was making. He was not screaming. He was not crying. He was not begging anyone to help him, to call a doctor, to save him. He was not cursing. I have heard men curse God when they were dying. I have heard men call out for their mothers. I have heard men make sounds that are not really words at all, just noise that the body makes when the mind is breaking. This man was not doing any of that. He was saying a name. Just one name. Over and over, quietly, like someone whispering to a person sitting right next to them. Some of my soldiers heard it and laughed. Others told him to stop. Nobody helped him. And I just stood there watching. The name he was saying was Jesus. Not shouted. Not cried. Just said. Repeated like breathing. Like the name was the breathing. I walked closer. I do not know why. Something pulled me. I stood over him and he opened his eyes. I was in full uniform. I was the general who had just led the operation that was killing him. And when he looked at me, there was no anger. There was no fear. I looked into his eyes, and I'm telling you honestly, those eyes looked calmer than mine did. Calmer than any eyes I had seen in a long time. Maybe ever. He looked at me for a moment, and then he looked up. Not at the ceiling. Past it maybe. And he said a few words that I will carry to my own grave. He told Jesus to take his soul. Then he was gone. I went home that night and I sat in my bedroom for a long time before I slept. I told myself what I always told myself after operations. That it was done. That what was done was done. That I served my country and I did my duty, and those are the things that matter. I had said those words to myself so many times that I could say them without thinking. Like a man who has repeated something until it has no meaning anymore. Just sounds coming from his mouth. But that night the words did not work. I kept seeing his face. Not in a dramatic way. Not like something from a movie where the vision is loud and shaking and overwhelming. Just quietly. I would close my eyes and there he was. I would look at the ceiling and there he was. He was not accusing me. He was not pointing at me. He was just there. Calm and looking upward and saying those words. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it had been a long night and my body and mind needed rest. But the days passed, and the face did not go away. A week went by. Then another. I kept returning to that moment. Not because I wanted to. I tried not to. I filled my days with reports and briefings and responsibilities, and I thought that if I kept moving, kept working, the image would fade the way memories usually fade when you stop paying attention to them. It did not fade. It got sharper. I started losing sleep. Not every night at first. Just some nights. I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and I would be wide awake, fully awake, with no way back to sleep, and I would lie there in the dark with that dying man's face in my mind. The calmness of it. The eyes. The name he kept saying. The last words. I have to be honest. The thing that was breaking me was not guilt. At least, not at first. It was confusion. I had seen hundreds of men die. I had been in combat. I had led operations. Death was not new to me. But dying men behave in a certain way. I had seen that certain way so many times that I thought I understood it completely. This man did not behave that way. And I could not explain it. That was what would not leave me alone. Not the guilt, not yet. The confusion. The fact that something had happened that did not fit any explanation I had. About 2 weeks after the operation, I ordered a quiet investigation. Not an official one. I told one trusted officer to find out who the man was. His name. His background. Anything available. A few days later, I had my answer. His name was Elias Nasser. He had been a schoolteacher. Primary school, years ago, before he left teaching and began spending his time in the community. People who knew him, Muslim neighbors and Christian ones alike, said the same kinds of things about him. That he was quiet. That he helped people without being asked. That he paid for medicine for families who could not afford it. That when food was short, he brought food. That he never made a big thing of any of it. That he prayed for people who did not like him. That last part is the one that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the wall. He prayed for people who did not like him. My officer told me this almost as a side detail, like it was a small thing. But it landed on me heavily. I have known soldiers who were brave men, physically, in ways that are hard to explain to people who have not been in a combat situation. I respected that kind of courage. I understood it. But this was a different category of thing entirely. To live in a place where your faith puts a target on your back, and to respond to that by praying for the very people who want to harm you, that takes something I did not have a name for at the time. I read the report 3 times. I read it that night and I read it again the next morning and I read it once more 2 days later. Each time, the picture of Elias Nasser got clearer and more confusing at the same time. He had given food to a family 2 streets over from his building who had nothing, and the father of that family told my officer that he had not even known Elias's name at the time. He just arrived one afternoon with things. And when the father tried to find out who he was so he could thank him properly, a neighbor told him it was the Christian man from down the road. The father said he was not sure how to feel about that at first, being helped by someone of a different faith. But then he said something that I could not stop thinking about. He said that Elias never asked him to change anything. Never used the help as a way to push any kind of conversation. He just helped and then went home. A woman in the community said she had been sick for several months and could not afford the treatment she needed. She said Elias found out through someone else. He never met her. He sent the money through a third person and asked that his name not be shared. She only found out later by accident. I kept returning to one image in my mind. This man, teaching school, then moving through his community, helping people who sometimes did not even know his name, praying quietly for people who resented him, and then on a cold January night, choosing to walk into a warehouse with fellow believers despite everything that kind of gathering meant in terms of risk. He made that choice knowingly. He was not foolish. He knew the danger. He went anyway. I read that and I thought, what does a person have to be holding on to make that choice? What is strong enough, real enough, certain enough, to walk through a door like that? I kept thinking about his eyes, about that calmness. It was not the calmness of a man who had given up. It was not the emptiness of someone who had gone somewhere far away in their mind to escape the pain. It was present. He was fully there and fully calm at the same time. I had never seen that combination before. I kept thinking about his face, about that calmness. It was not the calmness of a man who had given up. It was not the emptiness of someone who had gone somewhere far away in their mind to escape the pain. It was present. He was fully there and fully calm at the same time. I had never seen that combination before. The dreams started about 3 weeks after the warehouse. The first one was simple. I was back inside the building, but it was empty. No bodies. No blood. Just the space and light coming in from somewhere I could not find. And Elias was standing there, completely fine, no wounds at all, just standing. He did not say anything in that dream. He just looked at me. I woke up and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I did not move for maybe 20 minutes. Just sat there in the dark, feeling the weight of the image. The fact that even in the dream, he was not accusing me. He was not pointing or shouting. He was just there, looking at me with the same expression I had seen in that warehouse. That quiet, that stillness. The dreams kept coming. Not every night, but often enough. Sometimes in the dreams Elias would speak, but the words were always questions. Not attacking questions. Not accusations exactly. Just questions that went deep into places I did not want to examine. Questions about choices I had made. About things I had told myself were necessary. About the difference between duty and truth. About what I actually believed, not what I had been told to believe. Those are different things, and in the dreams, that difference felt very important. I am a military man. I do not like things I cannot explain, and I like things I cannot control even less. Those dreams were both. I tried the usual things. I worked longer hours. I exercised until my body was too tired to think. I told myself, more firmly this time, that I was under stress and that stress produces strange things in the sleeping mind. I tried to dismiss it all with logic. It did not work. The dreams stayed. Then one night, about 5 weeks after the warehouse, something happened that was different from the dreams. I had gone to bed around midnight. I fell asleep normally. And then, at some point in the night, I came awake. I was awake. Not dreaming. I know the difference between the feeling of a dream and the feeling of being awake in a room. I was awake. But I could not move. My body would not respond to me. My arms, my legs, everything was still. I remember trying to move and nothing happening. And I was not panicking, which was the strange part. My mind was clear and alert, but my body was simply still. I should explain this more carefully, because when I tell this part of the story, people sometimes nod quickly and move on, like they have already filed it under a familiar category. I want you to slow down with me here. I am a man who has spent decades in military service. I am trained to assess situations. I am trained to identify confusion and panic in myself and in others. I know what sleep paralysis is. I know what a hypnagogic state looks like. I know what it feels like when the body is between sleep and waking and the mind does strange things. This was not that. The clarity I felt in that moment was sharper than ordinary waking. My mind was not foggy. I was not confused about where I was. I knew exactly where I was, what night it was, what had been happening in my life. I was fully present. And I could not move, and I was not afraid in the way that absence of control usually produces fear in me. And then there was light. It was not like turning on a lamp. It was not like sunlight from a window. It was something I do not have the right words for. The room was filled with it in a way that was slow and total, and it did not hurt to look at, and it was warm. Not warm like temperature. Warm in some other way that I also do not have the right words for. At the foot of my bed, there was a figure. A man, dressed in white. Standing there. I should have been terrified. Any rational mind looking back at that scene will say a person would be terrified. And part of me was. My heart was going very fast. But at the same time, there was something else in the room along with the fear. A peace that had no business being there. A peace that made no sense given what I was seeing. The figure said my name. And then he told me something. He did not shout it. He did not lecture me or accuse me with anger. He asked me a question, and he showed me something, and he told me something, and the sequence of those three things, happening in the space of what felt like minutes but could have been seconds, rearranged something permanent inside me. The question was about why I was fighting against his people. The way it was asked was not aggressive. It was not like an interrogation. It was something closer to the tone of someone asking a question they already know the answer to, but asking it because they want the person in front of them to hear themselves in it. To sit in it for a moment. And I did sit in it. Even as it was being asked, something in me went very quiet. Then he showed me things. Not like watching a film. More like being inside the moments themselves, even for just a second each. I saw the warehouse again. I saw the faces of the people who had died there. I saw Elias. I saw other things from my career, things I had done, orders I had carried out, justifications I had made inside my own head. Things I had buried and told myself were necessary and then moved on from. Things from years ago that I had not thought about in a long time. I saw them again all at once, compressed into a moment that felt much longer than it was. Not just the actions themselves, but something about the full weight of them. Like seeing something not just with your eyes but understanding it in your body at the same time. Then he told me that forgiveness was available. Even for me. Those exact words. Even for me. And then it was gone. The light went. The room was dark again. I could move. I was sitting up in bed and my face was wet and I did not remember when I had started crying. I sat there for a very long time. I did not try to sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my knees and I just breathed, in and out, for a long time. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think it is important. I did not immediately become a different person. I did not wake up the next morning changed. A part of me still tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was the disrupted sleep. Maybe it was the guilt and the dreams combining into something that felt real but was not. I tried all of those explanations on, one at a time, in the days that followed. But none of them fit, because the thing I kept coming back to was not just the vision itself. It was what the vision knew. It knew my name. It showed me specific things from specific moments in my life. Moments I had never told anyone about. Moments that lived only in my own memory. Moments from years before that I thought I had successfully buried. And the peace in that room, alongside the fear, that was not something I could have manufactured. I know my own mind. I have lived in it for 48 years. That peace was not from me. I started, very quietly and very secretly, trying to learn about Jesus. This was not simple. I was a senior military officer in a country where what I was doing could end my career at best and my freedom at worst. I was careful. I obtained a Bible. I read it in private, at odd hours, with it hidden away when I was done. I did not tell anyone what I was doing. The reading was slow at first. I did not always understand what I was reading. But I kept going. And the more I read, the more I recognized something. The person in those pages, the things he said, the way he treated people, the things he valued, it matched. It matched what I had seen in Elias. It matched the peace I had seen in the dying man's eyes. It matched the feeling in the room the night the figure appeared. There is a word for when pieces of something begin to come together and make a shape that you finally recognize. I do not know the exact word in English, but that is what was happening to me. The pieces were arranging themselves into a shape. It took months. Months of reading. Months of sitting with the memories. Months of going back and forth between believing and not believing, between accepting what had happened and trying to explain it away again. Faith is not a light switch. At least, it was not for me. It was more like learning to walk after not using your legs for a very long time. Slow, uncomfortable, uncertain. But I kept going. And eventually, I made a decision. I surrendered my life to Jesus. I said those words not in a church, not in front of a pastor, but alone in my room at night, the same room where I had seen the light and the figure. I said the words simply. I told him that I believed he was real, that I believed he had come for me, that I was sorry for the things I had done, that I wanted to follow him. That was the beginning. What came after was not easy. I want to say that clearly. The stories people sometimes tell about faith, they make it sound like the hard part ends when the decision is made. Like once you step through the door, the rest is light and peace and everything going smoothly. That was not my experience. People who had known me my whole adult life began to pull away when small things started to change about me. The questions I asked, the decisions I made, the way I responded to certain orders. I did not announce what I believed. I was not ready for that, and I also understood the danger. But people could see that something had changed. And when people can see that something has changed, they start to wonder what, and when they wonder what, they start to watch. Military colleagues began looking at me differently. A few of them asked me directly if I was okay. A few others said things behind my back but loudly enough that they reached me about loyalty, about identity, about who I was becoming. Friends I had known for years began to disappear. Not dramatically. Not with confrontations. They just became unavailable. Calls that used to be returned stopped being returned. Invitations stopped coming. I had known, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this was possible. But knowing something is possible and living through it are very different things. There were days when the loneliness of it pressed down on me in ways I was not prepared for. Days when I sat in my house with the Bible on my lap and I thought about everything I was losing and I asked myself whether this was real, whether I had made a mistake, whether I had lost my grip on reality somewhere along the way. And then I would remember Elias. Not the warehouse. Not the operation. Just him, in those last moments, repeating that name with everything leaving him and nothing but peace on his face. And I would think he knew something. He had found something real. Something solid enough to stand on when everything else was going. I had seen it in his eyes. I had felt it in the room that night. It was real. I knew it was real. And that would carry me through another day. Years have passed now since that January night in Tez. I have left a lot behind. The rank, the uniform, the career, the identity I carried for over 2 decades. Most of the relationships I thought were permanent. A version of myself that I thought was permanent. When you have been one kind of man for that long, losing that shape of yourself is not a small thing. Even when you know the losing is right, it still costs something real. What I have found on the other side of all that losing, I do not have elegant words for. It is not what I expected because I did not know what to expect. It is something quieter than I thought it would be. Steadier. Something that does not perform for anyone or make itself look bigger than it is. Just real. Persistent. Present. Like a current running under everything else. Some days I can feel it clearly. Other days it is harder to reach. But it does not disappear. That is the thing I have learned to be most grateful for. It does not disappear. I think about Elias often. I think about how strange it is that a man I did not know, a man who died in a building I led the operation on, became the beginning of everything that matters in my life. He did not plan to change me. He did not set out to reach me or convert me or argue me into anything. He just lived and died in the only way he knew how. Honestly. Without pretending to be something he was not. Without hiding the thing at the center of his life, even when hiding it would have kept him alive. He said one name at the end. Just one name. Over and over, quietly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And that name undid me completely. People ask me sometimes, now that I speak more openly about my story, what it was that convinced me. They want to know what the argument was. What the logic was. What evidence I found that pushed me over from one side to the other. They expect a theological answer or a philosophical one. They expect a list of points that I can walk them through. Some people are almost disappointed when I do not have that kind of answer. They want the kind of conversion story that makes rational sense, where someone gets presented with data and evaluates it carefully and concludes something. I do not have that story to give them. I tell them what I always tell them. I was not convinced by an argument. I was not persuaded by a preacher or won over in a debate. I had no one walking me through evidence or explaining doctrine to me step by step. What changed me was a moment. One moment at the end of one man's life. A moment where all the noise stopped and what was left was a dying man and a name and a piece that had no right to be there. I have thought about why that particular moment reached me when nothing else had. I think part of the answer is that I had spent my entire adult life around men who were trained to be strong. To show nothing. To hold it together no matter what. And in that warehouse, in that dying schoolteacher, I saw a kind of strength I had never seen before. Not the strength that comes from training and discipline and telling yourself to feel nothing. A different kind. The kind that comes from being held by something. From knowing, actually knowing and not just believing as a theory, that you are not alone and that where you are going is safe. That kind of strength I had never encountered. Not once in 23 years of military life. And it broke something open in me that all the arguments in the world could not have reached. I want to say something to anyone reading this who has done things they are ashamed of. Anyone who has looked back at their life and thought that what they have done puts them too far from any kind of forgiveness. I am not saying this lightly, and I am not saying it as a comfortable religious phrase that people repeat without meaning it. The night the figure appeared in my room, the one thing he said to me, the thing I will remember longer than any other, was that forgiveness was available. And then those 2 words after it. Even for me. Even for me. I was the general who led that operation. I was the man who walked through that warehouse. I gave the orders that ended 36 lives. If there was a list of people who were too far gone, I would have expected my name to be near the top of it. I would not have argued with anyone who said I was beyond reach. But that is not what I was told. I do not say that to excuse what happened or to make it smaller than it was. What happened was terrible. I carry that. I will carry it until I stop breathing. There is no version of my life where I get to put that down and walk away clean. I do not ask for that. What I am saying is that even carrying all of that, I was told clearly that there was still a door open for me. That forgiveness reaches further than I thought it did. Further than I deserved. Further than made sense to me at the time, or honestly even now. That is the only testimony I have. It is not polished. It does not have clean edges. There are parts of it I still do not fully understand and probably never will. But it is true. Every word of it is true. Elias Nasser died saying one name. He died without fear. He died with something in his eyes that I had never seen before and could not stop seeing after. He was a schoolteacher from Taz who fed strangers and prayed for enemies and went to a warehouse on a cold January night to meet with people who believed in the same thing he believed in. He never knew my name. He never knew I would spend weeks investigating his life. He never knew that his last 2 minutes on Earth would pull apart a 23-year military career and rebuild a man from the foundation up. But that is exactly what happened. And I have spent the years since trying to be even a small fraction of what he was. Trying to live with the kind of honesty and quiet courage that he lived with. Failing often. Getting up and trying again. Some days that is the whole of it. Failing and getting up. But I have not stopped. I do not know what comes next for me. The path has not been easy and I do not expect it to become easy. But I know what I saw that night in the warehouse. I know what I saw in that room with the light. I know what I found in the pages I read alone in secret in the early hours of the morning. It was real. It is real. And that is enough.